So hi everybody, I'm Cheryl. I'm sure the non-professional bio components that Katie would have mentioned is I'm also an avid wine drinker, love live music. I'm a mother to two children that are 10 and 12 who are currently in their bedrooms because mommy asked them to be quiet for this period of time while mommy was doing a presentation. And I also have a rescue dog named Barney who I rescued 3 years ago. He's blind because unfortunately he was badly abused by whoever previously had him. So I have a 13-year-old dog, Barney, in my home as well, who is sequestered with the children in their rooms right now. But we're all real people here, so I decided to share a little bit about that. And my basement flooded last night, and so we're dealing with that today. And today is also our Emergency Advisory Committee meeting of council. So we have a few things going on, but what I'm hoping I'll be able to do for you today is be able to give you some tools about managing communications during a pandemic, which could be both at work or maybe even in your own personal life. So without further ado, I'll get started of what I hope you'll learn today is a little bit about suggested structures for how you might structure a crisis communications team if something happens. And then tell you a little bit about some experiences I've had as far as responding from a political level versus a corporation level, and hopefully give you a couple of concrete samples that can be used to manage communications during a pandemic. So a couple things to keep in mind that are very helpful is, I know it sounds obvious, but the need for dissemination of timely and accurate information is absolutely critical in managing communications. So I know some people struggle at first about waiting for all of the information to be in, but I'll get to this in a little bit, but I really put this as a top level one because it's still important to say what you know and don't know at the time as soon as you know it. So even if you're still gathering information, it's really important to be able to communicate to people that this is what I know for now, I'm still confirming, our organization is aware of this issue, but still confirming. So just want to put that out there. And then in terms of the type and severity of the crisis communications response strategy, one of the things that I do, or another tip, is just in terms of being able to understand whose issue is it. Lots of people struggle with this because lots of people like to chime in issue land, but is it your organization's issue? Is it a stakeholder issue? Is it someone that you're related to issue? Because this will actually affect the way that you scale up or down the type of communications that you give out, like what's within your control, what's not within your control, and how can you be very clear about that. So another thing, obviously ensuring your municipality and organization is prepared to speak with one voice. This can be difficult for larger organizations, and I know we have some participants, although I can't see you. I know we have a variety of people from a variety of organizations, so welcome. Sorry I can't see you, but whether you are a municipality or an organization, it's very critical that you align your communications messaging so that you are speaking with one voice. And I don't mean that there is to be differing opinions. I'm saying this from the communications perspective, that everyone within your organization needs to be aware of what are the key messages, what is our current information, what is the facts, because if you have various people giving different stories, it's not going to help and it is going to actually affect your credibility. So that will help you to mitigate negative reputational impacts. Another top thing, be authentic, not bureaucratic. Obviously, I work for the city of Edmonton, and I can say that at times we do use bureaucratic language, and wherever possible, I've tried to challenge as a communicator to, can we please say that in plain English? Because we like to use a lot of technical terms and acronyms and governance language. So people like to know that who they're hearing from are real people and that they are cared for as well. So wherever possible, I always encourage that. As far as when things first happen, this is a key thing in terms of, do you even have a notification system? Do you have one in place? If not, I highly recommend that you do, because it would be good to have a list of, if something were to happen in your organization that was going to affect you, do you already have all the information on how to reach everybody that would need to be notified? So whether it's emails, phone tree, whatever you do. And most of the time things happen after hours, like the flood in my basement, or things that happen in a city. So just being able to have processes in place is very critical. Now, in terms of calling in your communications people. I don't know the structure of each of your organizations, but do you have one? That would be always good to know that you have communications people on hand who are professionals that can help you out, because these are some of the scenarios in terms of when you're going to need some communications people, as far as whether it's media or you're going to have to speak about it, an issue might escalate, you can always benefit from some communications. So next slide. In terms of some of my recommendations of who should you have on a communications team, and I recognize that some of the organizations that are joining us today are from smaller organizations, but small or large, these are just recommendations of things to think about in terms of having the ability to have these types of roles, because they are very critical in the time of managing any kind of pandemic or issues. So who is leading your crisis communications? Maybe you're one of the organizations where you just have one communications person. I would highly recommend that you have some backup ready. So even if you have a main communications person, how are you going to bring in a backup team, or who are you going to have on standby as a consultant or team of people that can help you out, because you will need the following things. So if you're a municipality, the next role is a little bit more centered around municipalities. So if you're not familiar yet with public information officers that sit in your emergency ops centers, you are going to need them. If that doesn't apply to you in your organization because you're not a municipality, you will still need the following people: media relations leads. And I say for reception centers and on-site, because in the case of the Fort McMurray fires, when we in the city of Edmonton took an entire municipality into our municipality, we had media trying to go to the reception center. We had media that wanted to talk to the mayor of Fort McMurray. We had media that wanted to talk to the mayor. And people need to coordinate that media, and it's in several locations. So being able to ensure that your organization is ready to go where the media is going to be, so that you have that covered. Social media, obviously very hot these days. Sometimes media people are also the social media people, but social media can become so large. It's been my experience that you almost want to have someone solely dedicated to just that, because there's so much to respond to. And in fact, now more than ever, maybe triple the amount of these people. And then in an organization, you have many stakeholders, whether it's your board, whether it's your public, whether it's your shareholders, whether it's your members. Who is responsible for also communicating with them? Because the same people can't be doing everything. So if you're trying to manage media, read social media, also respond to external stakeholders, it's going to become overwhelming very quickly. So I would suggest trying to have these roles in place. And then of course, internal relations, very critical. You don't want your staff finding out about things through the media. At least I do not recommend that. So internal relations is key as well. And in terms of any of those roles, I would also recommend having the backups to the backups for those roles. And especially now at the City of Edmonton, everything we're going through, I know you'll hear from Mary Sturgeon a little bit later, my colleague at the city, who will share some of our learnings to date from COVID. But they have quite a large team of communicators at the City of Edmonton, and you need to be able to rotate out through those roles, because it's hard to go 24/7 all the time. This is a thing that people get hung up on. So who reports to who? In terms of, in the chaos and confusion, whether you're managing a pandemic or an issue, how have you already outlined a process on who is going to report up the information? Who is going to sign off the communications? Because lots of people will stumble through this one in terms of, you don't want to put too many cooks in the kitchen and have like 10 different people looking at a document and editing by group, which is super annoying. So if you can in advance have a critical path forward in terms of the following people will have the full authority to be able to sign off, whether it's a news release, a social media statement. I recommend just building up a level of trust within your organization that you say, these people are authorized to do so, and we entrust in them that they will do so based on the accurate information that they have. But sometimes people haven't worked out the who gets to see it, and so wherever possible, if you can do that in advance, that would be great. So in terms of, this may seem like an obvious point, but as far as some of the strategies, as far as how you build them into your communications crisis strategy, do you know media relations? Are you familiar with media relations? If you're not, you should probably get your organization all trained up. And there's plenty of people that are out there to support that if you don't have that experience. But do you have things ready to go? So in the case of the City of Edmonton, and in particular, in my role in the mayor's office, some things look a little bit different, and I'll get to that about political versus the corporation. So I am responsible for communications coming from the mayor and all of his media relations. That is separate from the City of Edmonton's media relations. Although I speak with the communications people every day, there's just two people in our office that do media relations and social media, and everything from the mayor's side of things. Keeps us pretty busy. So we've built up some templates for anything that could possibly happen under the sun in terms of how would the mayor respond to this particular issue, so that we're ready and then we're not scrambling for a couple hours. And from the city side, I did what I could when I was their director of communications as well, to try and put things together to be ready, whether it's a tornado or a flood or an incident or a death, to be ready. So next slide, please. So in terms of just making sure you have some things ready to go for your organizations, these are just some of my recommendations as far as being able to, what kind of templates do you have in place? Do you have any? And where will you put people for information? Is that your website? Where are they going to go for the information? Do you have messages ready to go? Again, just going back to being ready, and how do you notify people within your organization? I think the recent, this COVID experience has definitely challenged people, and you see a lot more of the online communication, but can't stress it enough in terms of how will you reach people when they're not all in the same place? Do you have text message alert? How do you reach your folks? So next slide. So I know this this one isn't applicable to everybody, but it is good to know that, let's say you're like ourselves, the City of Edmonton, signs ready to go, that if you were suddenly bringing in, say, whether it's the Fort McMurray fires and trying to direct people in the reception center and having signs up, do you have templates ready to go? That do you have a person responsible that you can call like that and on hand to print your signs for you? Signage is very important for people, whether it's electronic or actual physical posters, or in the case of COVID right now, I mean, you have signage everywhere, like at the playgrounds and all the dog parks, everywhere, reminders of messaging in terms of physical distancing. But I think it's really important because people need to be able to see that. And again, who is trained in your organization to be able to broadcast information quickly? And do you have enough of them? And what is your backup plan when the technology fails? Next slide. So in terms of some of the strategies moving forward, here's some tips as far as just things that you might want to walk through or have ready when you're trying to plan out your communications response, as far as when it's coming, whether it's a pandemic or a particular issue in your organization or your municipality, is what's within your control to be able to tell people about. And obviously public safety needs to be first and foremost, and how we're going to address that, and who else is involved. So in the case of COVID in particular, obviously Alberta Health Services has been a critical partner for us. And then also the provincial government, all of our neighboring municipalities. And I see that Mayor Choi is joined us. So hello, Mayor Choi as well. So we have several neighboring partners here in the City of Edmonton, and we consider them partners because we have no borders, so to speak. And it's very important to know how are we all working together and managing this together as well. But these are critical things in terms of where are people going, and how will you direct them. And if there's a fire or a flooding situation or an unsafe place to go, also where are you telling people where not to go? And then also the media, for example, how are you going to manage requests where suddenly there's some huge fire and you can't have them stand anywhere near, and you need to be able to communicate that information to them for their own public safety. But just being ready for those things. Do you have people that know how to talk to the media and explain to them while still working with them on being able to get their proper media footage, but in a safe place? So if you have a plan that includes all of these elements, you definitely want to have a sign off on the plan and start training your organization about the plan. And I know Trish will probably get into more the importance of that, and why she's doing what she's doing in terms of getting people effectively trained. But I can't stress it enough. You think you're ready and you're not, and you want to make sure that you're doing training and more training. And true life stories in terms of, in my entire career of public service for the last 21 years, I'm a bit of a crisis communications geek. So I've always been the one that's like, so, you know, if this happens, like, how are we going to do this? And being ready. And some of the time over my personal experience, they're like, yeah, that won't happen, or don't worry about that, Cheryl, we'll deal with that when that happens. But this is the reason you need to have it ready so it's ready to go. So I can't stress it enough. Training exercises are critical. And even our own mayor and council, we have run them through a couple of exercises, and they have their own learnings every time they go through it. And the organization has their learnings in terms of who needs to know what. And going back to the whole political versus corporation, sometimes whether you have a board or, like I said, shareholders, I mean, even though the organization is trying to manage the incident, have you thought about your political folks? Because sometimes since they are elected, you know, they may have different views, and it's hard for, say, as an example, in the city of Edmonton, managing 13 different perspectives. So we've tried really hard in the last little while, and I've participated in some of the training exercises to really support the city of Edmonton in helping the mayor and councillors understand what their roles would be during a crisis, and really being able to walk them through that so that they're ready and they're able to speak with one voice. So, and I always recommend that if you can think of all the scenarios that might happen to your organization, chat with them before something happens. So when I was the director of communications for the city of Edmonton, for example, I tried to have regular meetups with EPCOR, ATCO, all the comms people from different organizations, where if something serious was happening in the city, we saw each other face to face, and we built those trusting relationships so that if something happened, police, fire, Alberta Health Services, all of them. And some of them still call me because they're not sure who to contact within the city. And I always put them in touch with the right people, but building those relationships really matters, especially in advance of a crisis. So I wanted to give a couple little examples of things we're learning in the land of COVID. So the reason this crisis is so different is because there doesn't appear to be an endpoint. And so we have had a tornado in the city of Edmonton before. We've had flooding before. We dealt with being the reception center for Fort McMurray. But what is different in this case is that there isn't an end. It just feels really longer term. So we're already into this like 3 months, and we're going to be into it for a lot longer. And people managing the crisis are also affected by the crisis. Say, like for myself at home with my 2 kids that I'm homeschooling, or dealing with flood, or having restrictions of where I need to go, doing the best we can. And in several cases, the people that are responding, whether it's firefighters or emergency personnel, maybe they're responding to a particular location, but it's not their house on fire. In the occasional case, it might be, like in Fort McMurray, but most of the time, the responders are separate from the actual issue. In this case, everyone is being affected. So this has been amplified. Job losses, the need for a bunch of political level advocacy, and I can get into that in a little bit, and keeping up with what's happening with all the other cities and other levels of government, and keeping an eye on mental health. And then more crises happening during the crisis, like floods and protests and all the events even from the past week. So there's so much happening right now, it can be rather overwhelming, but it's just a good example of how to be ready if you have something happening within something happening. So in the case of when COVID first came out, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. So on March 16th, so almost 3 months ago when City Hall shut down, I'll tell you a little story that on March, I was watching everything in COVID land right before that, and kind of asking and pushing, like, so what's our plan to respond to that? And the mayor and I had a very good chats about that. And at the time, he had his one-on-ones with our city manager, and he's like, so this is way before March, like I'd say January, February-ish, and yep, yeah, Alberta Health Services is kind of watching, public health is watching, but we weren't having like super long conversations about this is everything that we would possibly be doing if this happens. And then suddenly, we're getting closer to things shutting down. And on March the 13th, I remember it particularly because for my own office, everybody thought I was being a bit funny, but I was like, we should be ready if things totally shut down and we can't actually come into City Hall. And I need this team to be able to still communicate. And on March 13th, I'm going around with my computer to make sure everyone knows how to use like Google Hangouts and meetups. And, you know, they thought it was kind of funny at the time, but I was like, I'm serious. We might be shut down by like Monday and you won't be able to come here. And I want you to be able to have all the stuff within this office to be able to go home with. And sure enough, on Monday, City Hall shut down and you weren't able to get in, except of course certain staff members that still need to go in, like myself and the mayor. And to give a little bit of a timeline, and I'm happy to take your questions too. I'm hoping to leave a big chunk of time so that you guys can also ask questions and be the speakers. But on March 18th, we still were not enacting a local state of emergency. And we had neighboring municipalities that were doing things at different times because they had council meetings at different times, as you can imagine. And what is a critical kind of early challenge is that it's not like you could call a quick meeting of all those neighboring municipalities and say, let's all declare the same thing all at once, because every municipality is a little bit different. But I would say it was an early challenge. And as things went on, our, Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board did come together and they have been meeting and talking about it. But I would say that an observation from my communication side of things is that that didn't happen early enough. And so I just saw the question in there and I'll get to that in a little bit. So in terms of by March 20th, we've then now declared a local state of emergency and everything needed to be set up virtually. So that was quite a challenge, whether it was city council processes, which as you can imagine, everyone on council has just been used to coming into council chambers and they hadn't actually practiced doing things virtually before. So they were learning on the go as well. And critical was, again, the who is doing what. So what was within Alberta health jurisdiction versus what's within the city of Edmonton jurisdiction. They are two different things. So being able to understand whose role was what and who was going to communicate what. And then political versus administrative. So wanted to get a little bit into that if it's helpful, and understanding that not everybody is into politics who's with us today, but whether, like I said, it's your board or your shareholders or governors that you have within your organization, it is critical to know when would you have them respond and what type of role do they play versus administrative side in terms of managing the actual incident. So in the case of mayor's office versus the city, what do people want to hear from the mayor? As their elected mayor, he is a people person, he is their person and a good human. And I don't just say that because I work for him, but I mean, any mayor of any city, he should be really the people's people, and being able to reach out from that people perspective versus the bureaucratic, here's everything that's totally happening, being able to, so part of our messaging needing to be very empathetic, but also like, hey, I'm a dad and I know what you're going through and I have to also homeschool my kids right now and it's challenging, and being able to recognize where people are at. And I'm not saying that the administration side doesn't also need to be empathetic, but from a leadership perspective and a governor's perspective, being able to understand where you would separate out the messages. So we've set it up where we're trying to be complementary, but also what would be different from what the mayor would say. So what are some of the governance things? Where does council need to make a decision versus administration making a decision? And it is really critical. And sometimes the lines get blurred, and being able to kind of talk that out. So next slide. So just thought I'd put that out there in case people were wondering a little bit about, like I was just mentioning. So our mayor in particular is the chair of what we call our Emergency Advisory Committee that we enacted for a variety of purposes, whether it would be like flood, tornado. It's basically who can be called together within an hour's notice, and whoever shows up to this committee. The mayor by default is supposed to be the chair, but if anything were to happen to the mayor, it's basically whichever councillors can come together within an hour become this committee and have to be able to respond, because these are the ones that have the ability to actually declare the local state of emergency, and we need to be able to do that quickly. So if one is out or one is challenged, you need to be able to make sure that you have backups in place. So his role is as the chair of that committee and as the community champion and being an empathetic leader, like I said. And another critical role having to advocate for our city, the city of Edmonton, to other levels of government, we've been spending a lot of our time doing that. I don't know if you've had the chance to watch some of the media in the city of Edmonton or social media, but I spent a lot of time doing communications on that. And then the difference with the role of the city manager, he's the head of the emergency management agency, which is comprised of all the senior leadership within the city of Edmonton. And he is the head of the city and all of the employees. So none of the employees report to the mayor. They actually report to the city manager. The only employees of the mayor is, of course, us in the mayor's office staff, and the auditor, and the city manager. So we know that a lot of it is defaulting to the shoulders of Adam as it relates to managing the crisis, but people are still really wanting to hear from the mayor, and they hold the mayor accountable. And good or bad, we hear from everyone on how they're feeling about things. And I'd be happy to ask, you can ask any questions about that, and I'll be super honest about things in terms of things we hear and what we do to also keep our mental health when we hear from Edmontonians who are angry with us. So what we are doing and continue to do during this crisis is, you may have seen, if you've seen the statements, they come from some support from yours truly and my other staff member in the office in terms of statements that we have to give out from the mayor, all our social media, etc. And the mayor is very active in his own social media. We just like to give him some advice in terms of, thinking through some of the processes and what he might say and the impacts of what he is going to say. And so we like to be his counsel in that regard before he chooses to do something, because we understand that, with the hundreds of thousands of followers that you have, your words do matter, and you're also, the mayor of the city, and the words do matter, and we do hear about the words and what was said, whether it's people writing in or calling us, or responding in social media. We hear from everybody, and exact words really matter. So, and obviously our office's role, I'm linking in with city comms daily, sometimes a few times in a day, and then liaising with external political and business stakeholders in the community, because they do want to hear from the mayor's office and know that we have their backs and that we're supporting them and that we're advocating for them and what we're doing at a political level. And then like I mentioned about our neighboring municipalities and being able to coordinate with them and keep in touch as well. And then Mary's going to get into this a little bit later in the show, so I don't want to steal her thunder there, but being able to understand what would we do in the mayor's office versus what the city comms team was doing is they really helped set up some of these virtual media scrum processes that we've been doing. So we've been managing it virtually at the city of Edmonton, not allowing media to enter City Hall because of the restrictions of indoor gatherers. But we set something up for them right away to be able to still see us and talk to us and ask questions. And that's been an amazing process to work out, and you should have that ready. And they've been in comms, obviously, working through the city manager's statements, internal, external. And we have a City of Edmonton YouTube channel as well, and the website, and 311 updates and city news releases and signage to update citizens. So Mary will get through some learnings in that regard as far as how that's been working and what she's learned as well. So what's funny or not funny, depending on which way you look at it, is everything happening. When I looked back over the past 3 months, what our top posts have been during COVID is clarifying statement on transit. So I'm not sure if you guys watched it. You probably did. And you may have had some strong reactions to it as well. And I, of course, welcome that feedback. But when the mayor said, I might have to just cut transit because I have no money, he wasn't kidding from the side of we have no money because we're running out of money and it is a very big issue. But it spread like wildfire and people are like, oh my God, we're going to cut transit. This is ridiculous. What a horrible move. But at the same time, it also got people's attention and also resonated with some of our advocacy, because you need to give people something concrete of something that's going to be potentially taken away from them if we don't get some of the support we need. Because every day the municipality is losing money, and that is why we are advocating with our neighboring all our partners around the board, and also the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association and the Rural Municipalities Association, being able to advocate with our business partners, being able to advocate with our union partners trying to get as many people as possible advocating for us, so it's not just the voice coming from the city of Edmonton proper, but we need to get that across. So sometimes you have to do something a little bit more racy or dramatic to understand that these are the types of services that are at risk if we can't run them because we don't have money to run them. And then other popular posts was, of course, anytime letting people know when things are reopening was huge. And then, of course, the bid to bring NHL back to Edmonton. We are big sports fans. Now, you can sit on both sides of that in terms of, I can't believe that people would be worried about that, but this was like the top post, and that tells you something about where people's heads are at in terms of wanting something to be excited about. And of course, I really want to be able to say, and this is super relevant over this past week and will continue to be, but the statements, we did do a mayor's statements on George Floyd, and we did do that at council, and we did it in social media, and we did do it in media, and that was also a top post. So separate from COVID altogether, like I said, when something is happening, while there's another crisis happening, if it's a big enough thing, it's going to dominate your communications. So anything else that you might possibly want to get across, like I've told my team several times over the past week and a bit, I said, this is the top communications thing right now, and we need to be responding to this, and we need to be a part of this, and we need to recognize where people's head are at. People are sad, people are angry, people are trying to be able to mobilize, people are trying to come together, and it's already during a time where people are still struggling and also thinking through their own issues and home lives. So this has really been an interesting past week and a bit, and it just goes to show you that although some things are important, like yes, the city of Edmonton does need money to be able to continue to function, and we hope to receive some kind of financial relief from other levels of government so that we can continue our critical services and be able to reopen fully and be able to hire people back who are on temporary layoff. All of that still does not even come close to the way people have been feeling over the past week and a half. And so any messaging about needing to advocate, we're not trying to be tone deaf, because we need to continue to do that, but it will be shadowed a bit by other things that are going on that are more important, and they're people things. So all these things relate to people. So my point is that no matter what you're doing, think about the top things that impact the people. And that's what's going to come out every time during the crisis. So are you thinking about those things? And people do need something to be hopeful about. And when people are feeling hurt, they're going to be very, very vocal about that. So next slide. So some of our complexities, like I mentioned, the need for funding from other levels of government. It's not like a sexy topic. And so therefore trying to explain it with like charts and graphs and saying this is how much it costs us to provide essential services and everything. I mean, sure, it's interesting, but only to those that are really following that. So like, so you need something tangible to tell people, like, this is what it really means. Like, I mean, are we gonna have to move to taking your garbage away every couple weeks instead of every week? Maybe. Is transit gonna be affected? Yeah. And it's very hard to explain who pays for what, because at the end of the day, our own residents here in the city of Edmonton, I mean, they just want sort of like, well, who cares? Just get it done. But it does get very complex between what level of government is responsible for what. And so it has been more challenging to help explain that. So we do try and do that in the mayor's office to explain, this is what we have the authority to do. This is what we need the provincial government to do. This is what we need the federal government to do. So while we've had some good media success in getting that across, it's a lot harder to get across in some social media. No surprise, but tax information in a time of COVID has been challenging to get across. People understanding, some taxes went up, some taxes went down, but being able to explain why when people are already feeling some stresses. And then budgets, like I said, who pays for what, being more challenging to explain. So just wanted to throw out a couple of last slides before I get to all of your questions in terms of just some top management tips. In terms of at the beginning, as far as focusing on accuracy and competence and not speculating on what you don't know. Like I said, even in the early phase of managing your issue, if you don't know something, still get something out and say, this is what we know and this is what we do not know. and when you're going to be able to get back to them. And it's very important to verify information, but you also have to understand that in the absence of information, you'll see people explode, especially on social media. So being able to recognize, ooh, where's the information gap and how can you move quickly? And being able to clearly outline what you're responsible for and who's accountable to who. And then obviously things have been changing a lot for us during COVID land. So being open and flexible, very, very important. How flexible is your organization is a critical question. Are you flexible? Is your culture flexible? Are the people willing to change and adapt if you have to on the fly? It is such a critical skill. It's not just for communicators, but for everyone within your organization. So have you trained people appropriately? Because this one is a biggie. And being able to change, I mean, my day changes in like, you know, every 30 minutes sometimes on some days, and then other days it's week by week, but you have to be able to have the ability to adapt and feel okay with that. And then in terms of being able to establish the credibility of your organization, just giving you a little tips, like just from myself and my experience working in media relations for so long. Sometimes, you know, media can find the processes very bureaucratic, and they like, you know, have to call a person, and then, you know, then that person has to check with the person who knows, and then only a statement comes back. I have really worked hard over the years to have a very direct relationship with reporters, to the point that I have an entire text chain going with all of our local reporters every single day during COVID. And they will text me and say, what's up with this? And what's up with that? And I give them an answer quickly. They've reached out to me. This really matters. And when you actually have the media saying, hey, like, thanks so much, Cheryl, we really appreciated that. Thanks for answering our questions. And sometimes when they have challenges with, say, trying to get to the right department in the city of Edmonton to get answers, I try and be able to direct them to the appropriate place, or if I can get the answer for them, I will, or putting them in touch where they can find the info. But being able to establish that credibility is so critical. So whatever role you play in communications, I mean, if you need to establish a very good role with the media, they need to know who you are and how to reach you, and know that what you're saying. And part of the credibility too is you have to play a little bit sometimes as far as trust. And I say that from the side of, say, in the city of Edmonton or the mayor's office, we've had embargoed documents that are only going to be ready at a certain hour or a certain time. Well, there's been a couple of times where I've said, okay, you know what, to help with the media in telling their story, I'm going to give you this document early so that you can read it through, ask me all the questions you want to ask, and then it's embargoed until this time. They super appreciate it. And in the entire time I've been in the mayor's office for the last 4 years, they have not broken it. So other times, I know the city has been hesitant to give things to reporters or leaks or things like that. But again, it goes back to your credibility. You give them something, you help them with some of the writing of their stories in advance, and it does actually help you. So typically some organizations can be very reserved about trying to give the information out because they're scared, like, this, we're not really doing this till tomorrow. Well, okay, but let's weigh the risks of that, because you can have a fuller story and you can give them probably a better interview if they have the information and have time to process it. So wherever possible, being able to do that. And then you can outline, like, what would be the operational risk of doing that, and kind of go from there. So that's, and then in terms of when things are happening, just as far as the timely and accurate information updates. So like I said, I've tried to tell media, like at the beginning of the day, here's what you can expect from the mayor today. Like, I'm not going to do a media availability with the mayor today. You might get your update from the city here at this time, through this meeting, through these people, and then being able to kind of manage that, but also being able to tell your public when they can expect information. So you'll see during COVID, obviously we've gotten used to the 3:30 updates most of the time from our favorite doctor. And that became kind of a pattern, because then people could expect, okay, I know that's coming at 3:30 every day. And you have the Prime Minister's statements every day at like 9-ish. And so that became consistent. But being able to know when that was happening allowed us to better plan around when we would plan some of our events, because we want to have some of that information. And being able to make sure that we have all the information, being able to verify. And then just being able to acknowledge and respond to feedback. We're obviously getting a lot of feedbacks during COVID land, and how do we acknowledge what people are feeling and saying, and be able to say, this is what we can do with your feedback, and here's why. So even if you can't do something right now, being able to acknowledge why you can't do something right now, or if someone thinks something's ridiculous or one of the restrictions is ridiculous, how can you explain why those restrictions are in place for their health and safety? So being able to tell people when they can expect those updates is very critical. Next slide. Now, I know we're not there quite yet as far as in COVID land, but just wanted to make sure you had these tips for any incident or pandemic or anything that might happen within your organization. So things that you might have to continue to do even when an event is over. So being able to, what were the key messages coming from that? Is there any new public information campaigns that need to be done? How are employees feeling about things? What worked, what didn't? What can your public say about what you did well or not well, and any kind of third-party support your organization can have, and being able to just, what does your organization stand for? What did we do really well? Like, I can envision that when all of this is done, I mean, we've been very transparent with our communications at the City of Edmonton and the Mayor's office, and I can say that proudly, because I know that when this is all over, we can say that, and that we were listening and we were reaching out and we were doing the best we could with what we could. So yeah, next slide is me. If you need to reach me later, this is my email and my cell phone number that I'm giving out. Lots of people have it. If you do have a follow-up question later that you don't want to ask today, I am still happy to take those, and this is how you reach me. But now I kind of want to be able to turn it over for questions to you guys, because I'm open to all of them. So maybe I will start with the first one that I see up here. So how is the city communicating? Oh, now just lost that. Well, that's 2 working employees and laid off employees who may be returning. So how we are communicating is a variety of ways. So Adam, the city manager that I mentioned, has a daily update that goes out to all staff. And even those that may not have access to email, we have other channels of reaching them. So daily, we are sending it to employees. Our union reps are also involved as partners during this process, and our HR department being able to keep in touch with all the employees that are also temporarily laid off. And I can tell you that the layoffs was one of the biggest and most heartbreaking challenges of this whole thing. I don't know if you watched the media availability. If you didn't, you can go back to the City of Edmonton's YouTube channel and have a look. But Adam cried. The mayor also teared up, and those tears are authentic. And when I was saying about being authentic, that matters, because leaders who shall remain nameless can sometimes appear cold and may use tactics such as, we're just going to announce things in the media, and we're just going to maybe not tell employees about that until this news release comes out. That's not the way to go. So in the City of Edmonton, we had to have conversations with employees in advance of things happening, as well as union leaders, and continue to be in touch with them daily. I don't get as involved in that process because, like I said, I'm in the mayor's office. So we're actually a small staff. But in terms of any further follow-ups, you can also maybe ask Mary as well if she has any further insights, because she's joining you later today and has been responsible for overseeing the crisis comms from the city side of things, which has been very complex, especially when you're dealing with people and job loss and their families and being affected, and advocating on their behalfs to the federal government to get funding to be able to reinstate them if we can, redeploy them if we can. So that's some of the things that we've been doing. So let's see what other questions people might have out there. Otherwise, I can tell you some other interesting things, or Katie might have a question.
There was one private question, and I know it's not necessarily related directly to communications, but it was in relation to when you transitioned to the working from home situation. How did FOIP play a role in that transition?
How did FOIP play a role?
Yeah.
The transition?
Like you were talking about text messaging.
Yep. Well, so I mean, our FOIP team is really on the ball. So they, prior to this happening, they actually, part of training within the city of Edmonton is actually that you have to take your FOIP training to be an employee and know that your text messages and everything is on the public record. And some people forget that, but certainly in the mayor's office, reminding people of that as well, because anyone can FOIP our information at any one time. So we are very active in that regard and understanding that, but we also share a lot of documents in FOIP. And where possible, you want it to not have to come to the point where someone has to FOIP it. We've had a couple situations with media, you know, can they just have the memo before they have to ask for the memo? Well, if you can be as transparent as possible up front and say, sure, like, don't go through the FOIP process to get this. What do you need? What can I give you? And understanding that all of your communications can be FOIPed. There was also a question about management and training in terms of when we were conducting some of these exercises. What did they look like? So in the, before COVID started, so be a day-long exercise, and we would run it from say 9 o'clock till 4 p.m. and run people through an actual scenario. So we've done a few different scenarios. One involved when we were about to host the Grey Cup, we ran the mayor and council through a process that what would happen if there was a bunch of protests that were happening and they were moving into our city, and then you added some flooding happening when you have all these guests arriving, and being able to give them these critical input points. So we worked with police, we worked with fire, we worked with the mayor and councillors on what would be their roles. So are they actually managing that incident? Oh, what if some of them are already at the Grey Cup? How are we also managing their security and protection, and what is happening with that? And being able to give them input points. And then it really helped them to understand what's their governance role, because then they all wanted to kind of go and communicate. We're like, wait, we have to like call together this emergency meeting and say, like, is it a state of emergency? Isn't it a state of emergency? Do we need to restrict movement? Okay, then council needs to make a decision. So walking them through those decision points, and then who would be communicating what. So where would our emergency operations center be doing the communications? When would the police be doing communications? And this one is critical because depending on which municipality you work for, if you do, the relationship with police is critical. And do you know their comms people? Like, are they on your speed dial? Because mine is on this one when there's something that I need to be able to get quickly, so that we're coordinating information. Because sometimes the different parts of a city want to respond, but they're not always talking to each other. So we wanted to run an exercise where you see like, okay, so then what would the police be saying? And let's go through something live. And then I would say, well, you know how we just called that meeting? The media are going to be right outside that door, even though you're not ready for your media conference yet. And they're like, okay. So I ran the mayor and the city manager at the time through a mock exercise of them having to do the media scrum as soon as they walked out of a room, because they've just called an emergency meeting and things like that. And then as far as from a comms team perspective, I've run a few myself, and then I know that Mary has also run a few, and I was a guest as the mayor's office participant in that. But when I did run the crisis communications training, whether it was at the city or my previous organizations, I would try and actually go through making people have to write the statements that would need to be written, practicing how to speak in front of a camera, just throwing a few bombs at them as far as things that they weren't expecting, and how do they respond? How do they collaborate with a team? Do they know who to reach out to? And just being able to really understand who knows what. But I think paramount is going into these exercises, telling people you do not have to be perfect. And everyone wants to be perfect, and they feel like if they've missed something, they're screwing up. No way. Like, we're going to screw up. We might have to learn some things, but that's the whole point. Get it out in training, do the training, and tell people we need to do the training because we'd like to work out the bugs now, so that when this really happens, those things don't happen. And that should get some people going in that regard. Like, so that certainly has helped with our organization in preparedness and being able to act quickly and put things together quickly. So do we have some more questions out there, anyone?
I don't see any other questions.
Yeah. So during, you not wondering like if, the mayor or office staff have all cried? We've all cried during this at one point or another. We've had daily touch base Google Hangouts with our team members within the mayor's office. And like I said, we're a very small team, but being able to just connect with each other daily. And our very first item on the agenda is always a check-in with each other. So maybe ending with that to let you know what's very important during this time. We're so busy just trying to manage the crisis, but being able to actually understand that we are also human and are experiencing it, and that our mental health really matters. So our first item on our agenda every day when our office touch base is, how are you doing? And some days I've said, I think I'm doing great. Other days I'm like, I'm not good. I'm not good at all. Or this happened with my kids, or these are my challenges for the day. But the more honest you can be in your organization, it is difficult for people to be able to say that they're struggling. It's really hard, but I really encourage you that the best teams that you will possibly build in your organization are ones that trust each other and are there for each other and understand that we are all human, and that we aren't just the work that we do. There's humans behind the work. So I've always taken that approach with teams that I've managed, because I know that if my employee comes in and they're feeling something, the way that they're feeling is affecting the way that they're working that day. So being able to be an empathetic leader as it relates to understanding and having some emotional intelligence about the people that you work with, and just stopping. And when you're in crisis comms, you're running a lot. And every so often I have to be reminded, just breathe, right? Just breathe. And when I see that people are reacting a certain way from my team members, I say, do we need to talk about that? Like, let's just take a couple minutes for you. What's going on? What can we help you with today that will help you through that? And then we find ways to really support each other. But I have definitely found that very beautiful on our team, and I hope that you experience the same thing in your organizations. And if you need any tips or want to reach out later and ask more about that, I'm happy to help you as well. I think we have a couple more questions in here then.
Yeah, there's two more. So one of them is, can you give an example of a time you were involved in a crisis where communications mistakes were made? If so, what happened and how did you move forward from it?
Well, yeah, this is the good stuff, right? Anonymous attendee. Okay. A couple of times. So I'll give a small example and then say maybe a bigger example. Let's say something concrete, like the mayor is feeling emotional on a particular day and may use words that could offend a certain segment of individuals. So let's say this, that going back to the words matter, if you use a word, anything in relation to people's like mental health or anything like that, and even if something isn't intended the way that it sounds, certain individuals are going to take it a certain way, because that's their world, and that's the way they feel. So having to correct it from a side of understanding that there was no intent or harm behind it, but being able to acknowledge it was the most important part. Like, sorry I used this word, and here's what I'm learning from it. Or being able to acknowledge that even though it wasn't your intent, this is what you were really thinking behind it. So that has happened. It's rare in the mayor's office, but also even the little things like at the City of Edmonton, when there was a particular incident where a flower bed, I know it sounds something small, but where a flower bed was accidentally ripped up at the wrong location, and the flower bed included like something very special that was planted from a family in honor of a deceased member of the family. And wow, yeah, the City of Edmonton had to come out and apologize for that. And we had the head, like the top head honcho, go out personally and go and see the family and apologize in person. Just addresses got mixed up in terms of which thing had to be ripped up at the wrong address. Bad incident. And the people reached out on social media like, can't believe this and that. Well, apologized on social media, went there in person, and being able to acknowledge your mistakes. It's always okay to acknowledge your mistakes. In fact, it makes you a better human when you do. So we have that discussion in the mayor's office a lot, like just being able to own it up and say, you know, when I said this, this is what I was thinking. And yeah, I did get a little bit heated. So being able to go back and say, is it okay to apologize? Does that actually legally hold us liable? Because if you're from a legal organization or you have lawyers that you work with within your organization, you know that lawyers also get super nervous when you are trying to say, I'm sorry, because does that add in liability for them? And then people can come at you and sue you. So I try and work with the lawyers where possible and saying, we still need to find some way to acknowledge this. And it's not okay to just leave it. Like, we need to be able to say. Another example might be, again, from the FOIP world, like, I don't know if you remember when all the harassment data came out from the city of Edmonton and a reporter had to FOIP the information and it wasn't given to her. Because maybe there was reasons, you know, they thought, okay, if this comes out, it might be bad or something like that. Well, people are going to get the information anyway. So find a way to work with all your people to give them the information, because it actually looks worse afterwards, like as if you've been hiding something. So in the absence of information, people will also make up stories because they don't have the whole context. So being able to work with things that you know that are controversial. So we have several audits in the city of Edmonton, and sometimes it'll show that, you know what, some people committed fraud in the city of Edmonton. Well, that's horrific. Well, how do you acknowledge those mistakes in terms of saying, like, I mean, have those individuals been removed from their employment? What processes are you changing up to be different so that you have further accountabilities in place? But it is always okay to acknowledge when we do something wrong. Anyone else have another question? Oh, I
Thanks,
see
Cheryl.
another one.
There's one more, and I think you have a meeting coming up soon, so I think we'll have this as the last question, and then if someone wants to follow up further with you, we'll be sharing this recording with everybody and everyone's contact information. So if you're okay with that, they can just contact you directly.
Yep. Oh, I see
Awesome.
this. But how do you manage varying levels of comfort with transparency in leadership? This is a good conversation. So I've had many challenges over the years in the organizations that I have worked with in terms of how comfortable people feel. Now, and I'm not saying this just because I work for the guy, but one of the reasons why I actually gave up a permanent job in the city of Edmonton to go work in the mayor's office is because he does believe in being as transparent as possible. And there hasn't been a discussion to date where I haven't been able to kind of talk him through, like, here's what I think we should do and why, and this is what I think we should give to the media, like as soon as you've said it or done it or written anything to any other level of government, or when this issue is coming up, let's just address it right away, and being able to talk to media. But other leaders that I have worked with aren't as comfortable with it. So where possible, from the communications argument perspective, being able to argue the point that people value transparency. So give them some concrete examples about when people have been transparent and how the response has gone over, while still preparing them for the bad news. Because usually when we're transparent about some bad news, you're of course going to get mixed reactions, like, how stupid are you, and how horrific, and we hate your leadership. But at the same time, you will have a huge group of people that know, wow, you know, this person is telling the truth. We really value their voice. They're speaking with truth. And that is just so critical. So I think it's really talking through what are the risks of us not being transparent, and being able to argue the negative reputational impacts that will happen if you're not transparent. So we were an office where, for example, in a political office, there are lots of political offices that do not want to disclose who they meet with. And we went out on a limb, you know, the last time the mayor won to be mayor, and said, let's start saying who we're meeting with. We want everything to be as transparent as possible. If you're coming to the mayor's office to try and advocate for something, whether it's the zoning that you want or you want a law changed, we are going to register you as someone that met with us. We didn't have to do that. We voluntarily did that. And so far it hasn't burned us once. And I really appreciate that. And so we've had to tell some people that maybe would be uncomfortable before having their names written down that you met with us, and they're everywhere. So if you ever want to check out who the mayor or mayor's office staff have met with, people that have tried to advocate for something, we have a mayor's office lobbyist registry, and it's available on the website, and that's pretty transparent. So yeah, you guys know how to reach me, but if you're thinking of something else, just feel free to reach out to me. And I wish I could have seen you there in person. I really hope that you learned something new and helpful. And maybe you'll think of something later, and I'm always happy to reach out and help. So
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I appreciate you, and I have always admired your authenticity, and I think that's partly why I'm proud to say that you're my colleague and also my friend. So I again appreciate your time. I think everybody probably found this as valuable and insightful as I did. Really driving home the importance of preparedness, which I appreciate because you know how passionate I am about that as well. And and I think also for everybody, one big takeaway as well is, you know, looking at handling multiple issues, especially when you're looking at something like the pandemic, that we don't have an end date, and there's all kinds of other multiple issues that can come up in the same time. So thank you for your insight. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to sharing a glass of wine with you eventually.